Hello and welcome to Future Food with me, your host, Analisa Winter. If you found this podcast, it's probably because you, like me, are passionate about food and you're curious about how we can use food as a vehicle for change to build a better future. This has been the focus of my work for the last few years. I'm an ecosystem developer, and everything I do centers around how we can unlock partnerships and collaborations within the food system. In my consulting practice, I advise corporations and investors who want to invest in the future of food, but may not know where to start or need help figuring out how to best use their capabilities to make a difference and make an impact. I also coach startup founders in the agri-food space, helping them to attract the right investors and develop their leadership capacity. And since I started this show, many of you have also slid into my DMs asking me how I created my career and how you too can transition into a career working on the future of food. So I also run a one-on-one coaching program called Creating Your Career, where I coach individuals, helping them to transition into and build their dream job working on the future of food. The best way to think of me is basically as a matchmaker. I work with individuals and organizations, helping them to connect to the ecosystem and build long-lasting partnerships that lead to good business and even better impact. This means that I get to talk to all kinds of people along the value chain. It's literally my job to do that. And I started this podcast because I realized how siloed our food system is. It's big, it's global, it's complex, and it's deeply interconnected, and yet many parts of the ecosystem never talk to each other. I believe that the future will be built on collaboration. That's the only way we can really create impact at scale on the timeline that we need to make things happen. And I started this show to share the stories of incredible organizations that I was meeting through my work. These organizations are doing amazing work and they have such a clear vision for the future, but they also need your help to make it happen. So in every episode, I ask guests about their vision for the future, what we're missing to get there, and what help or collaborations they're looking for. They even share their contact information, whether they're an executive or a startup CEO, which you can find in the episode transcript linked in the show notes. And the reason that I do this is to democratize access to each other and foster collaboration. So if you love the work that a guest on this show is doing and you want to work with them, you're interested to learn more, my invitation to you is to reach out. That's the whole point of why I'm doing this. The listeners of this podcast have also had such good success doing so. Some have written me sharing that they found jobs, they've switched career paths, they went to get a new university degree, they launched partnerships, and they even landed investments. Who knows what's possible for you? And I know from putting lots of deals together that there is no better way to connect with someone than hearing their story. When we hear someone's story, it plants a seed and it also just brings us deeper into relationship. So this show is all about making it easier for you to make a move and get that first conversation going. The last thing I'll say before we jump into today's episode is that this podcast is listener supported. So if you love the content I create, or if this show has created value for you, maybe giving you a great idea, influencing how you think, even prompting you to get into some form of a new relationship in the space, please consider becoming a subscriber and supporting the show for a few dollars every month. Your membership will give you access to every single guest contact information, episode transcripts, exclusive content, and premium perks. And you can become a subscriber by following the link in the show notes, and you can learn more about working with me on www.analisawinter.com. Now let's go ahead and jump in. Over the last 5 years, I've done a lot of different deep dives as it relates to the podcast and the work I do consulting different corporations on how they're creating a better future through food, as well as working with entrepreneurs around what kind of organizations they're building that will help to transform the food system. And in my coaching practice, I work with a lot of people who want to transition into a career working in food, investing, impact investing, sustainability. And one of the most interesting things is looking at how do we truly design different organizations? How do we think differently? How do we come in with a new lens? How do we think from a regenerative economy perspective? All of these different ideas.
At the same time, I have spent a lot of time researching the food system, which has led to changes in my own behavior, changes in my family's behavior. And especially in the last year, I have been on a journey of choosing differently. So, really tapping into the idea that we vote with our dollar, and where I spend my money is going to have a ripple effect on the supply chain and the system that is behind that product. So, when it comes to food, what we're talking about is diversifying one's diet. We're talking about choosing to buy organic or buying regenerative products or buying grass fed, pasture raised. Even when it comes to your clothes, looking at where are those sourced. So, the last year, I've been upgrading a lot of what I eat. I've been getting in better contact with local producers where I live, but I've also been learning a lot about my own health and what would be most supportive for really making sure that I have vitality, that I am just maximizing my energy through every day and creating resilience in myself so that I can build an organization, so that I can serve my clients, so that I can really have an impact. And that really starts with us and how we treat ourselves. So, today's podcast is something different than I've done before because we're going to be talking about the role of hormonal health and how that impacts nutrition, our health and well being, as well as the food system. I have invited my coach, Haley Nicole, to join me today. She has been the person that has been guiding me on my journey to transition off of hormonal birth control and really go back to a natural state and get better in touch with my body, but also get the education I always wish I had around women's hormonal health and how we differ than men. I think my favorite part of this episode today is when we talk about that famous song and saying, "It's a man's world," if you remember that. And that's actually true when we think about organizational design. Men have a 24-hour hormonal cycle, which means that their cortisol levels rise in the morning and then it starts to go down at the end of the day. So it's on a 24-hour clock that really corresponds with our 9 to 5. Women, on the other hand, have a much longer cycle. It can be between 28 to 32 days, and even that fluctuates. So the world isn't really designed for us. And I have had the pleasure of stepping into the role of being an entrepreneur and designing an organization. And when one does that, one is confronted with a lot of questions around how do you want your company to look like? This is also what I work with my clients on when we're looking at how they're going to create their career. How are they going to design their organization? How are they going to build their company to truly reflect the world they want to see? For me, it was really important to dive into, as a woman, as a female leader, what do I need to be nourished and supported and really do the work that I want to do in this world? To do that, I first had to figure out, who am I without hormones that are changing my levels and not quite me as I am? But then also, what do I need as a woman to truly support myself? Because hormones govern a lot of how we feel and how we think. People don't always realize that. So today we cover it all. We're going to go through exactly what is the impact of hormones in our body? How does that differ between men and women? We're going to talk about ways that you can support your hormonal health and why a lot of people view fertility as a vital sign and why, especially for women, that's super important. And then we're also going to talk about that link to the food system. So how eating the right things, truly getting enough sleep, avoiding stress, making sure you don't burn out, and different practices you can do to support yourself in that ultimately lead towards better health outcomes. So it's a very exciting episode. I can say that working with Haley has been very transformative for me. I've changed so much in my life. I've really focused on getting 8 hours of sleep every night, having consistent meal times, and making sure I take enough time to sit down and eat, as well as looking at how do I avoid stress in my life. There are times of the month where I am not as productive as other times, and it's okay to design an organization where that is okay. So I'm very excited to share this with you. If you are inspired, if you take anything away, if it resonates, if it brings up new questions for you, please go ahead and send me a message, or better yet, share this episode with someone who you think would like to listen to it. You can always take a screenshot and put it on LinkedIn, put it on Instagram, and tag me to show that you've been listening and to share this message with the world. So I hope you enjoy it. Can't wait to hear from you. And let's go ahead and dive in.
Hi, Haley, and welcome to the Future Food Podcast. I'm very, very excited to have you on today.
Thank you, Analisa. I am so equally excited to be here with you.
Yeah. And this is a totally different episode than I've ever done before because it starts from a personal place. And I want to begin by giving that backstory of why you're here, how I came to know you. And that's because about 6-ish months ago, maybe 8 months ago, I made the decision that I wanted to transition off of birth control. And that started a while before. One, it just kind of was like bubbling as this thing. For me, I got on birth control when I was in my late teens, early 20s. And that meant I'd been on it for about a decade and really hadn't had a period for a long time. And at first I thought that was amazing, but then I was like, you know what? This is feeling kind of weird. I haven't known my body in my entire 20s, which is a bit strange in that point of seeing myself as a cyclical being or a woman that has menstruation. And then I also really wanted, or I came to have a much deeper understanding doing food systems work, how interconnected our hormones are, along with what we eat and how we nourish ourselves and how we grow our food. So that led me down some pretty big rabbit holes. And it was just like all lanes were leading to the point that I really wanted to start working with a coach to make this change and to make this transition. And then I found you through like the magic of Instagram. It's just your profile appeared. And I was like, that's who I need to work with. So we're going to dive a lot more into that. My intention today is one, for me to share more about my journey, why this matters, why more people should maybe be aware of it, but then also to generally share what is it that is the interconnections in this space between our hormones, between the food that we're eating, the food system overall. Why is it that so many women are working in food and caring so much about it? Because it's like light bulbs go on where we just can't even understand that this is the way we've been growing our food for so long. So that's a little bit of an intro overall, but I'd love to turn to you and then just hear your journey into women's health, how you also came to awareness about hormones, fertility, the importance of that. What's your backstory?
So starting in high school, I really began to have a really troublesome relationship to food. That's really where my journey with women's health begins, was feeling really conflicted around how I should eat, what I should eat, my body image. And I ended up developing a really severe eating disorder for about 5 to 6 years. And on the positive side of that, there was a lot of insight around just how food really plays this massive role within our vitality, within our health, within our hormones. And my relationship to food started to get much better towards the end of college. So my disordered eating was end of high school throughout most of college, but towards the end of college, I had begun to kind of put some of those pieces together and do the deeper healing work that I needed to do. And throughout college, I was studying nutrition. So I was very heavily involved just in learning about food and nourishment. And from the university level, it's more focused on disease management versus disease prevention and overall vitality, which is more of the space that I find myself in today with my women's health practice. But still, nonetheless, I was very involved just in food in general. And my interest in hormonal health started a couple of years after college. So I was probably 23, 24 at the time. And it began through my own relationship with birth control. I, as many other young women, just got on birth control because I figured that was the right thing to do. I was somewhat sexually active, but not enough to the point where I needed to be on birth control long term in any means. And thankfully, every time I had gone on it, I would begin to have really adverse reactions to it. So I would just be extremely emotional and moody, or I would gain weight and just hold on to a lot of water retention. The biggest symptom for me was I just did not feel like myself. I can't really put it any other way. I felt really disconnected from my sense of self. And so I kind of had this on and off relationship with birth control for probably about 4 to 5 years. And eventually ended up getting the copper IUD because at this time I was in a serious relationship and was not wanting to get pregnant in any means. And the copper IUD is touted as this very wonderful form of birth control because there are no hormones. However, the reaction that I was continuously having cycle after cycle was just horrible. I would be bleeding for 5-6 days, really heavy, to the point where I was just going through tampon after tampon. I would quite literally need to take a pack of Midol every single time I would bleed because of the painful cramps. And I'm not really someone who struggles with painful periods. That was purely because of the copper IUD. I never experienced that before and never experienced it afterwards. And so I just got completely over it at some point and said to myself, this is not working, said to my partner, this is not working, and did not get any answers or solutions from mainstream medicine as to how I could prevent pregnancy without hormones, without an IUD. And by some luck of God, grace of God, I think I had found the book Taking Charge of Your Fertility, which is just an incredible book on preventing pregnancy naturally and more natural forms of birth control, right around the same time where I was just like, no more, I can't do this anymore. And I got my IUD removed. It was a very interesting, somewhat traumatic day. The doctor basically, just as she's removing my IUD, is just telling me story after story of patients who have gotten off birth control and gotten pregnant, and basically just hands me a bag of condoms and waves me out the door saying good luck.
Oh boy.
And that memory just, it's so vivid within my mind still to this day. And so from that point forward, I was just on a mission to really understand my menstrual cycle, to understand how my fertility worked, to understand how I could restore my fertility after being on birth control on and off for all of these years. And I was also having some other hormonal issues because of years and years of disordered eating. When we're not nourishing our bodies consistently for years, there is going to be, it's taxing on the adrenals, on the thyroid. So anyways, that's really what began my own journey, was just, I was fascinated with my own body. It really started with my own experience. And the more I began to talk to friends and other women about what I was going through, I was just hearing similar story after similar story. And before you knew it, I was kind of becoming the go-to person within my friend group, within their friends, extended friends, whatever, to speak to about what they were navigating within primarily their menstrual health and transitioning off birth control. And so from there, I decided to just extend my own studies and extend my knowledge in menstrual health and fertility. Well, all of that happened, my transitioning off birth control. Goodness, it's probably been at least 8 years now, but I started my women's health practice in 2019. And yeah, I support women with the process of transitioning off birth control, as I've been so privileged to support you with, Analisa, and then also just menstrual health in general, pregnancy preparation, and fertility.
I have to jump back to your story about when you got your IUD removed, because I had a very similar experience. My question that I got from the doctor was, are you, one, planning to have kids, or why are you removing this? And I was like, no, I just would like to know what it's like for my body to be without hormones. Like, who am I without this thing inside of me?
Mm-hmm.
And then two, she immediately referred me to go and do IVF and get my eggs frozen, because it was a line of questioning around like, so do you have a boyfriend? You don't have a boyfriend? Well, if you think about it, it's going to take you a few years to find someone, and then this and that. And that again led me to being like, whoa, does this mean I'm not healthy? Does this mean I'm at risk? Does it mean I can't have, like, a whole spiral of thoughts? But even when I think back to why I went on birth control in the beginning, it was out of a place of fear. And I don't actually think it was out of empowerment. It was way more the, I always remember this scene from the movie Mean Girls, which was a cult phenomenon when I was growing up. And it was the joke, if you have sex, you're going to get pregnant and die, which is not true. And it's not necessarily that easy to get pregnant, but that was seared in my memory. And I just really had this thought of like, okay, I have to really protect myself.
Mm-hmm.
And birth control definitely was a mechanism that then didn't make me think at all, but it was paired with not having any women's health education. So when I was growing up, going through high school and middle school, I was not taught about how to nourish my body, nourish a female body, was not taught about fertility, the importance of fertility in sustaining, especially female health, and like that's such an indicator of life, which I want to talk to you about next. But that really being a core thought of like, okay, I'm not actually at all in touch with what is the rhythm of my body, what's going on, because a lot of that's being suppressed. And when I had the hormonal birth control taken out and I stopped, I actually also felt like a weight was lifted, and it was shocking. I felt like a different person.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you can speak to why that is, or why that's often a shared experience that people feel different when they come off of it. But I'd love to start there around what actually happens or what's going on.
Yeah, I love that question. So there's a lot of things that are going on when we're on hormonal birth control. And it's important to understand that not all hormonal birth control is the same. So we have oral contraceptives, we have IUDs. Those are kind of the main forms of birth control. But even within those categories, there are different compositions of the specific hormones that essentially bring on different manifestations within the body that halt fertility. So the way that most forms of hormonal birth control are working is that it is halting and preventing ovulation from happening. So ovulation, for those who don't know, is essentially the act of one, maybe two eggs being released from your ovaries. And this happens on a cyclical basis within the female body when we aren't on birth control. And when we are in our state of ovulation, we tend to feel magnetic, vibrant, high energy, right? This is when we are the most fertile. And so that can feel very good within our system, within our body. So, on the flip side of that, being on hormonal birth control, that hormonal process is completely shut down. So, not only is ovulation in and of itself shut down, but the hormonal cascade of estrogen climbing and then peaking and then progesterone coming into action, it's essentially halted. So the communication between our pituitary gland and our ovaries is not happening at all. So that's essentially the main basis as to how hormonal birth control works. Other forms work by changing our cervical mucus or not allowing our uterus to build up a uterine lining would essentially not allow implantation to occur. If our uterus is really scanty and there's not a plush lining there, there's no way for the embryo to implant into the uterus. It just won't happen. So when women get off birth control, everyone has their own unique, beautiful response to that process. For some people, it's much more easeful. For other people, it can be challenging. And the reason I say it's beautiful is because I really believe that we have our own experience with that. And it's a part of our journey. We're meant to experience however our body responds to that transition. But what I've noticed also just anecdotally and within my own practice is that women feel a lot more connected to themselves overall when they transition off birth control. So maybe that's due to the hormonal piece of it, because we have this belief in our brain that hormones are kind of the devil, right? That the hormones are the problem, that they contribute to a lot of this chaos within the female body. And yeah, if they're out of balance or if they're not in the right ratio with each other, yes, they can create symptoms. But also, our hormones are here to support us, right? Like estrogen allows us to feel really juicy and lubricative and vibrant and communicative and organized within our lives. Whereas progesterone is this really lovely, natural stress reducing hormone that supports with our nervous system regulation. It supports with sleep and just overall rest and digest state within our systems. So I think that's part of it. I also think that there is a return to just our creative essence when we transition off birth control, because when we are within that natural cycle again of menstruating, having a real menstruation, not a pill bleed, which we can go into if you want to around the differences of those. So having a real menstruation, having a real ovulation, and moving through those highs and lows, those peaks and valleys, we feel just more connected to our creativity. We feel more connected to our emotional state. And so again, everyone has their own experience with transitioning off. And it's not to say everyone's journey is peace, love, and butterflies. But I think that overall, once you get past that first year, most women will say that they feel significantly better off hormonal birth control, especially if they have addressed any previous hormonal imbalances that might have been a result of being on the pill for a long time or that potentially were occurring within their body before.
Yeah. And one, if you're a man who's still listening to this, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
This also does affect you. So I hope that you listen until the end because women are like 50% of the population. And if you're trying to have kids, it's good to know what's going on with your partner and also what we go through. And there's so much goodness in store with this conversation. So I want to say that. Two, I think it might just be good to lay the groundwork of what actually it is when we're talking about the difference of a man's hormonal cycle, because men are also hormonal versus a woman's hormonal cycle, which is different, longer, and has a different interplay of progesterone and estrogen. So can you just lay out the difference between the two?
Absolutely. So men tend to be on more of a 24-hour hormonal cycle, whereas women are typically on about a 26 to 35 day hormonal cycle. So before I go into the differences, I just want to clarify with those listening that the 28-day cycle is actually, it's not the pinnacle of cycle health, right? Our cycle can be really anywhere between 26 and 35 days for it to be considered healthy. So going back to a man's cycle, hormonal cycle, in the morning, their cortisol rises, which is same with the female body as well. So with a healthy cortisol response, cortisol being one of our main stress hormones, but it's still very essential for overall well-being, we do need some cortisol. So male body, female body, both will have a rise in cortisol in the morning. And that's what wakes us up in the morning, gets us ready for our day. It makes us feel like, okay, like we're ready to tackle the things that we need to accomplish for the day ahead. Men, their primary sex hormone is testosterone. Okay. Women have testosterone as well, but men have it in significantly higher amounts. So testosterone for men is going to start peaking pretty early morning, like depending on when you wake up, normally about an hour after that male wakes up, his testosterone will begin to rise. And it stays pretty elevated and sustained until around 3 or 4 p.m., which is for most people when our sense of focus tends to start declining. So testosterone raises, it's pretty steady throughout the day. 3 to 4 p.m., it begins to head down for the rest of the day. And then by evening time, it's, much lower than what it was mid-morning. And then that is their cycle again and again and again, day in, day out. They have a pretty similar hormonal rhythm. Females, on the other side, are much more complicated and nuanced, which is beautiful and how it should be. But many of us are probably familiar with the saying, like, we live in a man's world, and I think that I don't know the exact origins of that phrase, but I think that this could be reflected to that, right? Because for the most of us, we wake up, we do our day, we slow down. It's really based off this 24-hour clock. So women, I'm going to start with day 1 of our menstrual cycle. And this rhythm that I'm going to detail through is most accurate for those who are in their reproductive years who are not on hormonal birth control. So if we are on hormonal birth control, we aren't having this cyclical rhythm. If we are menopausal, we aren't having this cyclical rhythm. So this is for reproductive age women. So day 1 is the first day of our menstrual cycle, the first day of our actual bleed. And day 1, we are at our lowest hormonal level. So estrogen and progesterone are at the lowest that they will be throughout your entire cycle. That's why we tend to feel more introverted. That's why we want to just cuddle up in our bed and be slow, because we don't have this pulse of hormones that is moving through our body. You have to think of hormones as they really do influence our personality, our communication, our overall sense of direction for the day will be greatly determined by your hormonal matrix that's present. So your hormones are pretty low for the first few days of your period. And then around day 3, your estrogen specifically begins to climb once again. So from around day 3 until ovulation, which can be anywhere from maybe day 12 of the cycle until day 21 of the cycle, estrogen is slowly but surely climbing. And essentially, estrogen has to reach this threshold in order for ovulation to happen in the first place. So, before I detail what happens through ovulation, it's important to understand estrogen's role. So, estrogen is our fertility hormone. She really supports with our vaginal health, vaginal lubrication, as shared before. She is protective for our bones, for our mental health. So, as estrogen's rising within the body, we're probably going to feel a rise within our own energetic output, within our own capacity. So I like to think of that first half of my cycle as a time where I'm very focused in my business. I'm getting things done. I'm initiating projects. I am brainstorming and strategizing for different things that might be ahead this cycle or in the future. Our brain tends to function just a little bit better when there's more estrogen present. So, yeah, estrogen's climbing and then ovulation occurs. And there's a variety of other hormones that are involved in this cascade. But what's really important to understand is that your brain is actually signaling most of these hormones to happen. So, we have a handful of pituitary hormones, but most specifically, follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone are really important in the sense of getting the follicles to grow. And then luteinizing hormone helps ovulation actually occur. So let's just say ovulation happens at day 14, right? Doesn't necessarily need to for a healthy cycle, but let's just say. So ovulation occurs. And once ovulation occurs, essentially the egg is released from this beautiful follicle that has been producing all of that estrogen. So the egg is released, and now there's essentially 2 entities. There's the egg, and there's what we call the corpus luteum. And so the egg travels into the uterine tubes, also known as the fallopian tubes, to await fertilization. Whereas this corpus luteum kind of hangs out around the ovary, and this corpus luteum is what produces progesterone. So progesterone is primarily made through ovulation. If we are not ovulating, we are not going to be producing enough progesterone. When you are on hormonal birth control, most of the progesterone, I say this in quotes, is not actual progesterone. It's progestin, which is a different form of the hormone, clearly. So corpus luteum is producing that progesterone. And so progesterone signals to the uterus to begin to create that really plush, homey, nourishing environment for that potential fertilized egg. Whether we want to have a baby or not within this time of our lives, it is the biological functioning of the female body to prepare for pregnancy and then shed the possibility of that every single cycle. We still really are animals in a lot of ways, right? We are mammals. So anyways, this corpus luteum is producing progesterone. As I shared earlier, progesterone has a lot of amazing stress reducing benefits. It's signaling to the uterus to create that beautiful environment. And if that egg is not fertilized within 24 hours, it disintegrates. So going back to your mean girl analogy, which is so, I think it really just shows how influential pop culture can be. on our own fertility belief system, there's really a very small window of time in which you can get pregnant. It's typically about 5 to 6 days max, because sperm can survive within the vaginal canal. So that egg disintegrates. Once that egg disintegrates, your body essentially knows that, okay, fertilization did not happen, conception is not going to happen. And so around, say, day 21 now, progesterone is still being pulsed out by that corpus luteum, but it slowly starts to it starts to slow down the production. And so then by day 28, once we basically are done with our progesterone production, our uterine lining begins to shed. So, and that being menstruation, the start of the cycle again. As we can see, that is a much different hormonal matrix and picture than the 24-hour male clock, because again, our hormones influence our energy, our appetite, our libido, our sense of self, whether we want to be externally facing for the day or more internally oriented. They can affect our creativity, our communication. Like, I could just go on and on as to how much our hormones influence us. And so I think it's beautiful that we're having this conversation, and that women begin to just understand, even from this really simple perspective, that our hormonal clock is significantly different than their male counterpart.
Yeah. And I've really just begun to fully understand that, even thinking about building my own business around, I don't have to be on the 24-hour clock. Like, I could actually design my work, design my life, design what I want to better fit what a female's needs are and how our bodies operate, which is not constantly in a state of go, 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 go. There needs to be room for the external and the internal and everything that comes up in between. But I would say for really the majority of my life, only in the last year or so have I been starting to create space for that and getting back to the rhythm of my body, which is a rhythm just like nature has its seasons, has been so illuminating to be like, oh, I'm no wonder I feel tired. I'm not meant to be going 24/7. Like, there needs to also be room for it all, and that's okay. And that's also something I've been learning a lot from you. I want to also just tie this into what we mean when we say that fertility is a vital sign. So when we think of vital signs, we're thinking of the air we breathe. That's a sign that we're able to inhale and exhale oxygen. Same with our pulse, our body's working in a certain function. But what do we mean when we say fertility is a vital sign?
Yeah. So this is a really important concept for people to understand. And so it's not just fertility, but it's menstrual health in general. So menstrual health encompassing our period, yes, actual menstruation, but then also ovulation and our luteal phase, which is most notoriously known for the time when we might experience PMS symptoms. So fertility as a vital sign, menstrual health as a vital sign, is a really important concept for us to have a grasp on, because fertility in and of itself is a luxury of the body, meaning that we don't need to procreate. We don't need to have babies, right? Yes, it's important for our species to continue forward in the name of evolution. But from an individual physiological perspective, if you are constantly stressed and under eating and over exercising or working too much, or just have a variety of other life stressors, financial, family stressors going on, your body, for very understandable reasons, could potentially shut down fertility as a way of signaling that right now just doesn't make sense as a time to conceive, as a time to bring in new life. And my thought process around this is that it's actually a very adaptive, beneficial measure of female physiology, because ancestrally speaking, 500 years ago, even 150 years ago, right? There were way more times of famine and disease, and obviously there's still war, but war, and just times where we were nomadic and moving around a lot more than we are today. And so that was an adaptive measure of the body saying, this isn't the right time. Like babies demand a lot of you. They demand a lot of resources. So yeah, when our body feels resourced, when it feels like there are enough nutrients, when it feels like stress is low, fertility is going to be prioritized, right? It is our natural state to be fertile. We shouldn't be going through these massive long periods of time of infertility if we are taking care of our body's needs. And so I think it's an important reframe because similar to your experience at the gynecologist's office, there's a lot of people who think I don't need to focus on my fertility until I want to have a baby. But if you want to feel your best, if you want to be your highest version of yourself, your fertility really needs to be in check. Because if you aren't ovulating, if you're having a painful menstrual cycle, if you're having raging PMS, all of those symptoms are going to impact your overall life, whether you want to have a baby or not. So again, like fertility is this sign of safety, and it's this sign that your body feels open and ready to bring in new life.
Hmm. And so how does that compare to men in terms of their key vital signs, what they need to look out for, compared to women really making sure that they're having a healthy menstruation that has their physiology in check?
Totally. I mean, fertility is a vital sign for men too. And I just was on a webinar the other day around just continuing education on fertility. And the presenter shared that 40% of infertility cases actually have to do with male infertility. So that's important too. And I think that that is beginning to generate a little bit more just space within media and within public awareness and knowledge, which is amazing. It's not always the woman's fault if we aren't able to get pregnant right away. So
isn't it like 90 days before the sperm is released? That's when the a man can influence the quality of his sperm, the quality
yes.
of what is being passed forth. But I think it's about 90 days. That's the cycle. And then it renews, right?
Yes, it's about 3 to 4 months for both female and male. So females is there. So the male sperm cycle, I'm forgetting exactly what it's called off the top of my mind, is shorter. It's about 3 to 4 months, meaning that how a male is treating his body today will impact the sperm that he releases 3 to 4 months from now. So that's why I'm really passionate about preconceptive care, because quite literally, how we're treating our bodies physically, emotionally, spiritually right now impact the future. That gives us a lot of merit. That gives us some time to say, okay, maybe I should lay down on the sugar. Maybe I should lay off the processed food, stop drinking as much, stop vaping, which is something, I don't know, I'm just seeing everywhere lately. And vaping is starting to there's some new research coming out around how vaping specifically is impacting male fertility. Female egg quality, on the other hand, is a little different. So the egg takes about a full year within its journey of getting from like kind of the start to the point of ovulation. And only 1 to 2 eggs per cycle is ovulated, and you have hundreds of thousands of eggs within your ovaries. You actually have the most eggs you'll ever have at 4 months gestation inside your mother's womb. And from that point forward, you actually lose eggs, which is really interesting. But the most influential part for egg quality for females is still within that 3 to 4 month time period as well. So a lot of the things that are beneficial for female hormonal health, like, are still beneficial for male health. I don't specifically work with men very closely or intimately, but their hormonal system is a lot less complicated than the female body.
But that concept is just so powerful of really knowing and really having it sink in that what you do to your body today is going to impact your future and future life.
Yeah.
That
and
for
children,
me,
your children.
Yeah, it shifted so much for me though, of not having be my own health. And this will then lead us beautifully into nourishment, not have it be something that falls by the wayside, but really being a top priority and knowing that's one of the most important things I can do to take care of myself now, in the future, and the future generations. Like, it's such an incredible act of love that ripples out far beyond than we can even conceive right now. And I don't use that word as a pun.
Yeah.
But it's quite a powerful thing to really tap into and understand. And that for me was also a very interesting, because while I've been working in food for like 5+ years now, it has only been recently and with this work that I've really started to change how I eat and how I nourish myself and make choices that ultimately are better for the planet, but really start with being better for me and understanding the importance of that. So, can you give us a little bit of the big picture between when we talk about hormones and the fact that they really operate a lot of who we are, and they're like a very guiding force in our lives that we may or may not be aware, kind of in the driver's seat? What does it mean to take care of them? What does it mean to nourish them? What does it mean to maintain them so that we're getting the best possible relationship we can to live our best possible lives?
Very loaded question, and I love it. Yeah. So I want people to think of hormones as kind of the interplay between their internal and their external world. And what's also important to understand about hormones is that they're never really the root cause problem. So if you're having hormonal issues, it's actually more important to look further upstream and think about inflammation, detoxification, stress management, sleep, digestive health. All of these things are essentially what kind of contribute to hormonal imbalance. But where I start with pretty much every single one of my clients is with nourishment and understanding how can we nourish ourselves and nourish our bodies for overall hormonal vitality. So that's a huge piece of the hormonal puzzle. And the reason for that is that clearly every time that we eat something, it's broken down. And our hormones are directly influenced by how we eat and the rhythm in which we eat and the presence in which we eat. So, for example, every time you eat some type of carbohydrate, whether that be an apple or a sweet potato or even a refined cookie or whatever it may be, carbohydrates kind of being the main form of sugar that we're consuming, it's going to break down into glucose. And in order for glucose to enter properly into our cells, a hormone called insulin is required. Insulin is essentially the key that attaches to our cells and like opens up essentially little valves so that glucose can enter into our cells. And glucose is the main form and preferred form of energy for specifically our brain. We need enough glucose. We need enough carbohydrates for ovulation to happen, for thyroid function to happen. The list goes on and on. So insulin specifically is considered a top tier hormone, meaning that if insulin is impacted negatively, which it can be by the things that we eat, how we eat, where we eat, all these things, if insulin is impacted negatively, that's going to have a downstream effect on our stress hormones, specifically cortisol, and then also our sex hormones, progesterone and estrogen. So as I shared earlier, fertility being this luxury, right? It's not our body's main priority. And so if insulin is consistently just like going off all day long and dysregulated all day long, that's going to have this downstream effect on our estrogen and progesterone. But to kind of get into like a little bit more of supportive tips, I guess you could say, for females as to how they should nourish, what I see in a large percent of the people that I serve is significant under eating. So I myself experienced this consciously for quite a while, but then even after my eating disorder, I now know how much I was under eating. I think the average American woman probably starts her day with a smoothie, maybe doesn't eat it until 10 or 11, has had coffee before that, barely takes a moment to eat for lunch, and then is like starving come dinner and just shoveling what she can get down in her mouth. And so what that is creating is just hormonal chaos in all regards, right? Again, insulin not being happy, our sex hormones are not going to be happy. And so some of the kind of top tier things, like foundational things that we can think of when it comes for nourishment for female physiology, first and foremost is going to be to eat enough, right? Eating enough and eating consistently. So this is going to change. I actually just did a post on this today. How frequently we eat is going to change based off where we are in the menstrual cycle. But to just keep it a little bit more simple, a good rule of thumb is like anywhere from 3 to 6 hours, depending on how you feel in between those eating intervals. So eating consistently, making sure you're eating enough, having a protein-rich breakfast. I can't begin to share the benefits of having a really substantial breakfast. I myself used to just wake up and skip breakfast all of the time. And maybe I wouldn't eat until 11, maybe I wouldn't eat until 1. And that is one of the absolute worst things that you can do for your hormone health is skipping breakfast, skipping meals in general, but especially breakfast. I really feel like most women are significantly under eating protein and fat, and protein from high quality animal sources and then also vegetable sources. We can find amino acids and protein within vegetable sources. It doesn't need to be coming from animal sources. In my experience, though, a lot of post-vegans, vegetarians do display common hormonal imbalances, irregular cycles, painful periods, fertility challenges, because they're simply not getting an abundance of nutrients. They're not getting the right combination of macronutrients, micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, all the things for their female physiology, again, to feel really safe and nourished. So that balance of protein, carbs, and fat is really, really important. And just getting like an array of foods in your diet, I think is really important too. Not just eating the same 5 things over and over again. I know that for the sake of convenience, that is what people rely on. And it's not to say that certain seasons of life, we can't have that kind of consistency, but the gut microbiome is really connected to our hormonal balance, and our gut microbiome thrives on diversity, thrives on plant diversity specifically. So sometimes my soul work for my clients will be to try a few different vegetables. When you go to the grocery store, like try beets and leeks instead of just getting like carrots and potatoes every single time, right? Increasing your diversity of food. Yeah, prioritization on this really important place of our life. I feel like that in and of itself really begins to shift things for people.
Yeah. And I'd love to draw this into the practical in our own lived experiences. For me, I'm not going to call myself guilty, but I was a little guilty of believing or following the intuitive eating concept, meaning
Yes.
another thing I heard from pop culture, and this is the struggle with food, is there's always this like, you should eat this, you shouldn't eat that, blah, blah, blah. And it can be really hard to know what to do to take the best care of yourself when really it's simple things, right? Like we diversify our financial portfolio, eat a diverse array of foods. That's also what I tell everyone in my keynotes is like the best thing you can do is start eating a more diverse diet. Stop having it be so homogeneous and just relying on one system versus then actually that cascades down into a stronger food system. But what I wanted to say is what you helped me to shift. And I think a big aha moment is when we think of little kids, they need to eat consistently, like every few hours on a schedule, and they thrive with structure. I did not know that my body needed structure. Yes. That was crazy aha awakening moment for me because I was someone that swore by like every day should be different. I'm just going to follow what I feel, la, 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 whatever. Really not prioritizing nourishment by any means. During our cycle, we'll be hungry to different levels at different times. So you might think you're not hungry, but you actually are hungry and you should still be eating because you need that nourishment. So specifically what shifted for me was a very clear understanding that one, I cannot drink coffee first thing in the morning. I'll admit I'm still working on this. It's a very hard habit to break because that's my go-to, but that having coffee on an empty stomach isn't great. And I'd love for you to talk more about why that is. 2 is then eating every 4 hours. And particularly for me, I am very bad at the afternoon snack, like the 4 p.m. needing to take a break, take a snack. And if I don't do that, I just find I don't have the energy to like go through the night and make dinner. And I start resenting making dinner and it's a whole thing. Yeah. But that was another big one. And another huge thing. Oh my gosh. I realized that I actually need 8 hours of sleep. That's critically important. And that going to bed at the same time, waking up at the same time is really important. And then also related to that, I stopped drinking alcohol significantly. So I still have some wine, but drinking way less than I did. And you helped me to realize also the impacts of alcohol in terms of really just disrupting our sleep, reducing the quality of sleep, and then also screwing with our hormones. So can you talk a little bit more particularly about coffee and alcohol and why that is so disruptive? And then maybe also a little bit about why our body likes structure.
Yeah, let me start with the structure piece because it's so true. The female body thrives off of rhythm. So going back to just the schedule piece, the female body thrives off of routine. She loves when you eat around the same time each day. She loves when you wake up and go to sleep around the same time each day. There is this sense of, again, safety. When we think about fertility, overall menstrual health, safety is a really huge piece of it. It doesn't mean that we can't live our lives, right? But again, sometimes our lives, we have to look at our lives in alignment with female physiology. Yes, no, there might need to be some lifestyle adjustments that we make there. So yeah, that can be a really huge takeaway, hopefully for some listeners, just around how to begin focusing on their hormone health. Overall vitality is engaging in some kind of rhythm. And then to the coffee and the alcohol piece. So coffee on an empty stomach is really intense for your adrenal glands. So your adrenal glands are two kidney-shaped glands that sit atop your kidneys, and they are the primary source production center of those sex hormones that we were speaking about earlier. And so I like to think of the adrenal glands as like really, really greedy, meaning that they will steal nutrients that are needed for sex hormone production. And also they're very susceptible. They're sensitive. There's a lot of things in our world, understandably, that can create excessive stress hormone production. And so when we drink coffee on an empty stomach and there's no food to absorb that caffeine, it's the caffeine that's too much to our system. So already when we have woken up in the morning, we've most likely undergone at least an 8-hour fast. For some people, that number can be as high as 10 to 12, depending on when they eat dinner versus when they wake up. And our body is designed to fast at night. It's supportive, it's beneficial, but beyond that 8 to 10 hours, our blood sugar is very, very low. Our body might need to go into our liver and essentially resource some of the glucose storage, also known as glucagon, that's inside of our liver. So essentially, when you drink that coffee first thing in the morning, not only is your blood sugar really not dysregulated, but low from not eating throughout the night and then in the morning, now you've impacted your stress hormones. And so it just becomes overtaxing to those adrenal glands day in, day out, because coffee is also an appetite it decreases your appetite. Suppressant, yes. So we drink that cup of coffee at 7 a.m. Well, maybe we actually were starting to feel those hunger hormones, but now that we've drinking coffee, maybe we won't feel those hunger hormones now until 9 or 10 a.m. And then if we ate dinner at 6 o'clock, that's almost 16 hours until we've nourished our body. That's a long period of time. So I'm not a huge fan of intermittent fasting. I think it can be beneficial for certain populations. For reproductive age women, I don't find it to be great. And so for those who have this like really strong coffee habit, this was my husband. I told him for years and years, do not drink coffee first thing. He had to hear it from someone else other than me to implement that. So now he doesn't do it, but just substitute it with something else. Have an herbal tea, right? I start my morning every morning with herbal tea. Does it taste the same as coffee? No, but it can still be kind of that like warm beverage, that warm hug that we all crave in the morning. Have a protein-rich breakfast that has healthy fats and a little bit of carbohydrates in there as well, and then have your coffee. And also it will sustain that caffeine longer. So instead of just having it first thing in the morning and feeling that jolt right away and then that crash a couple hours later. If you have caffeine after you eat, after your blood sugar is already in a regulated state, it's going to be sustained and slower acting on your system. And it's not going to be detrimental to those adrenal glands because they've gotten their requirements. They're like, yeah, I'm nourished. So that's the piece on coffee. That's a huge thing for a lot of people, the coffee. And what's great is you don't have to give up the coffee. You can still have the coffee. It just have it after breakfast.
The other one with alcohol, I definitely
Yes.
noticed that when I got off of birth control, when I feel way more easily hungover, it does not take a lot. I feel way more susceptible, going back to other things I think that were suppressed before, which now it's so clear to me that like this is not good for my body. Oh my God, it's not good for my body. But can you talk a little bit about the impact of alcohol and hormones, but also on our sleep? Because I mean, it's both. It's a lot.
Yes, I would love to.
Inflammation.
Yeah. So I went to a regular college. I went to San Diego State. I drank a lot in my youth. And I think when you're young, you can get away with it a lot easier than when you reach your mid to late 20s and into your 30s and beyond. Your body's detoxification system, it actually slows down. That's why you were able to tolerate alcohol better in your youth than you maybe are into your adulthood. So specifically as to how it relates to hormones, there's a couple of different mechanisms here that are at play. A side note, we can link to a really good solo episode I did that explains this in greater depth for those that are interested.
Awesome.
But first off, alcohol is really detrimental to your liver, right? So your liver being your main detoxification organ. Every time that your body is exposed or comes into contact with any kind of toxin, it has to be metabolized and processed through your liver. So our livers are in constant action day in, day out. And the liver's function is to detox toxins, right? That's its focus. That's what it was built to do. So it's not to say that it can't do that, but over time, the liver can become burdensome. It can become tired and sluggish, right? And so specifically when we're drinking alcohol consistently, and for me, even when people are drinking 2 to 3 days a week, to me, that's consistency. Maybe that's even 2 days on the weekend. Like that can be, in my eyes, as a female health practitioner, that's still kind of a red flag in terms of alcohol consistency. So to the liver, it just begins to get taxed, begins to get heavy. It has to work harder in order for those detoxification pathways to open up and be enabled. And typically also when we're drinking, not always, but for some people, when we're drinking, we're also not eating as well. So take into account we're drinking and now we might be eating greasier, more processed foods, right? Our like nutritional sense is maybe not as clear as it might be if we were sober. And the reason that this impacts sleep specifically is that the liver's primary time of function is around 1 to 3 a.m. So that's when the liver is like functioning at its highest, when it's detoxifying the most. And so that's when prime sleep is happening. So when we are drinking heavily and then we're trying to sleep, like our liver is kind of in overdrive mode, which is going to impact our sleep. If our liver is kind of like revving up for this detox, it's going to impact our body's ability to sleep. It's just part of the game.
You mentioned heavy drinking, but I think even 1 or 2
Regular
glasses of wine, a beer,
Yes.
like it, I don't think even a lot also is
Totally.
It has a similar impact, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, it's like that functioning, those detoxification capabilities, they decrease with age. So again, maybe you could do that in your early 20s, but now in your 30s, you can't because your liver has just naturally slowed down. And there's a lot of ways that we can support the liver, which we can go into here in a second if you want. But another huge way that alcohol consumption impacts hormones is by influencing estrogen. So again, healthy amounts of estrogen are needed, but excessive amounts of estrogen are where we begin to experience migraines, heavy cycles, cysts, fibroids, like really, really heavy bleeding, painful periods, all of these things. High estrogen can be the root cause, not the root, as I said, there's a lot of other roots, to hormonal imbalances, but it can be contributing to a lot of these menstrual health symptoms. And so, yeah, it increases our estrogen. Even just one glass of wine has been shown to increase our estrogen levels. So that compounds over time. Not only now do we have excessive exogenous levels of estrogen. Well, actually, sorry, they're not exogenous. They're still being created from the body. Not only do we have these higher levels of estrogen within the body, but now that the liver is impaired also, the liver is responsible for phase 1 and phase 2 of estrogen detoxification. So now you kind of have two major points of the detoxification system that have been negatively impacted and aren't functioning properly. So yeah, that can lead to a host of issues.
You can hear this is big. And I think there's
Yeah.
also the most shared podcast in 2023 was also from the Huberman Lab about alcohol and the impact on the body, which I
Yes.
think is so interesting for this day and age and time. I'll
Yes.
also link to that. So I also think this is a good time to link in the quality of food, because one thing is eating consistently and just, taking care of your body, but what we put in our body, from the diversity to the quality of what was grown, also really matters.
Yeah.
And while I know this and have known this for a long time, I was also definitely guilty of being on a budget, going in the grocery store and being like, I'd rather spend my money on, for example, drinks going out on the weekend versus on my food. And it was really this summer that I live with my parents. So my whole household, including my parents and I, have transitioned pretty much everything to grass-fed, organic, much higher quality sources of food whenever possible, knowing who the producers are, but really making that shift, which was uncomfortable. And there were quite a few arguments of like, we have to go out of our way to get this thing, or it costs a lot more money, or blah, blah, blah. But, we've worked through that now. And one, again, I feel a huge difference in terms of how I feel, but I really want to raise the awareness around the importance, even for our own health, on choosing higher quality products that are well made and how that relates to our fertility, our hormonal imbalance. I'd give it to you to just explain that a little bit further.
Yeah. So, as you know, our food system is in need of dire love and healing. Our soil is at an all-time low right now, and our soil is quite literally what fuels our bodies, right? If the soil is depleted, then our bodies are going to be depleted. When there's not enough minerals and vitamins within the soil where these foods are being grown and harvested, that's only going to translate into our physical bodies. So quality is huge. And I've even seen it be that tipping point for people where they might not even need to change what they're eating, just simply the quality of the food that they're eating. So, starting with organic, I'm sure the listeners of your podcast, they're food minded, they're food conscious. So, organic is very important so that we're not putting in excessive pesticides into our body. Is organic perfect? No, there are still downfalls and shortcomings to the label of organic. Can we be in control of every single thing that enters our body? No. But a good way to kind of counterbalance that is shopping at farmers markets and getting to know your farmer a little bit more, and understanding local farming practices and eating seasonally, because when we eat seasonally, we're way less likely to interact with a variety of chemicals, because when things are grown out of season, that's not the conditions in which we want those things to be grown. So organic is obviously important.
I just want to add into, when we talk about the health of the soil, that I think it's key to just make the connection that the plants that we eat, even the animals that we eat, are eating things that come from the soil. So those plants are absorbing the nutrients in the soil. And there's that famous expression, you are what you eat. We mean that quite literally, because we're absorbing whatever those nutrients were from the plants and animals, which came from the soil. So it all starts with soil health, because that gets passed down the chain.
Yeah. And with the animal piece, I am a proponent of high quality animal protein and products for the female body. And the reason that animal quality is so important is because of what you just shared. If the animals that we are consuming are eating a diet that's high in soy and corn and are living in confined areas where they're having to be injected with hormones and taking a variety of medications just to maintain their overall like stability. And in addition to that, they're being exposed to probably a variety of bacterias and pathogens from these unsanitary conditions. Well, that's of course going to impact the quality and the nutritional composition within the products that we're eating, within the animal products that we're eating. They've found that the ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s is drastically better and higher in more pasture-raised grass-fed animals. So omega-6 kind of being more of the inflammatory fats that we can find in our vegetable oils, whereas omega-3s are going to be found in like avocados and nuts and seeds and, you know, those higher quality animal proteins. So yeah, we really are what we eat. And so, like I said, I've seen huge transitions with people's health just by shifting that quality. A big thing here too is dairy. The quality of dairy is this like massive range. Dairy is not just one food group in my eyes. It's this massive range of quality here, all the way from conventional dairy that is being produced all the way across the world and being put onto our plates, which in my eyes just doesn't really make any sense, all the way to dairy products that are coming from, maybe for some of us, a farm down the street, or for some of us, a farm 100 miles away, or an organic pasture-raised farm that we can find in the grocery store. Again, the composition of nutrients is going to be vastly different, and it's going to be more health promoting. And so yeah, everyone is at a different place with where they can influence the quality of their food, and price and finances obviously are at kind of the precipice of that. And so I think that when I approach this with my clients, it's like, okay, well, what's the biggest bang for our buck here? Like, where are we going to see the biggest changes with this? And so for me, I normally say, okay, let's shift to higher quality animal products being the number one priority, and then organic kind of being that second priority. But in between there, I'm sure you've spoken about this, like there are certain fruits and vegetables that are sprayed much more heavily. Like there's the, what is it, clean 15 and dirty dozen. So I'll share that graphic with my clients and have them prioritize like the clean 15 if they can't afford the organic. So yeah, I think quality is a really big piece to the hormonal matrix, to the hormonal health of a female, because also, you know, pesticides and all these pollutants and chemicals, like they impact our hormones in ways that we do know and that we're also still figuring out.
Oh, yeah. And this was also a huge shift that I've made, even looking at my beauty products, cleaning products, other products.
Yeah.
And I used to have a stereotype of like, I don't know, the environmental hippie who wouldn't use anything and is just totally au naturel. But especially moving back to the US from Europe, which is the US is a lot less regulated than the Europe is. I really feel like I'm doing such an active love towards myself in the world when I'm choosing a product that's better for me, and just knowing again, what is that ripple effect that's just like huge. It's huge. Now I have switched out my shampoos. We've switched out a lot of cleaning products, switched out laundry detergent, looking at the pans that we used to cook with. And one thing that's really become top of mind for me in the last few years of doing this work is how many women I meet working in food, which is a lot, because women understand that the food system needs love, so much love in order to heal it. And two, many times it's after those women have become mothers, because they didn't care about how they were taking care of themselves. But as soon as they had a child to take care of, they were like, we're putting what in this child? You want me to put them in what environment to absorb what? No. And then they kind of get up in arms and start taking a lot of inspired action. Yeah. But I think knowing that now, sharing this information now and not standing for it, like really voting with your dollar, voting for something different is so key. And I wish we didn't have to fight, but we do. We have to fight with the power that we do have for the world we want to see, the products we want to see that are healthy for everyone. And it's not something we have to compromise on.
Yeah, I love that, you know, example that you just shared around the mother really becoming much more passionate about this once there's another being who's potentially going to be at harm through all the pollutants and chemicals in our system, because children's bodies are much more sensitive than adult bodies. And yeah, I love that you've changed out. I know we've worked on this a little bit, like your shampoo and your personal care products. That's a really great place to start for people. On average, women put at least 20 different products on their body every single day.
I believe it.
From
100%.
From shampoo, conditioner, body wash, lotion, and then all the products you put on your face, maybe perfume, hair. A huge practice for me has been, I mean, I've never really been a very high maintenance person in any means, but just limiting the amount of stuff that my body is coming into contact with. I don't need to put 12 layers of cream on my face. I don't need to be using 100 different body lotions or whatever it may be. So I think that just the consciousness around it is really important. And I shared that one resource with you, EWG, which is great for just understanding like where your products lie on that scale. There are some downfalls to that system. It doesn't have everything, but I think it is a really good place to start. And then also the cleaning products. There are a ton of more environmentally friendly and human friendly cleaning products available, from dish detergent, hand soap, cleaning spray, laundry detergent is a huge one, right? Laundry detergent is getting all over our clothes that we're basking in all day, right? So if your laundry detergent is toxic, then your clothes are going to be toxic. And yeah, you don't want your clothes to be toxic. So yeah, I think that that's definitely an area of hormonal health that takes time. It takes time to switch all of these things. It's not to say throw out all of your products now. What I normally tell my clients is to, once you run out of something, just be open to replacing it with something that's a little bit more hormone health friendly.
And I think this aspect of it taking time is so important, because it has been a journey for me, and it can be overwhelming in terms of information. But there's also been times where I felt so angry that I was never told this until now, of like, why did no one teach me this? This feels so obvious. Or why did no one teach me how my body actually works? Why do I have to go out and hire someone to learn? Like, shouldn't I be able to just like know this from when I was young? Like, it's just one of those things where it's really important to take responsibility for understanding your body and how to take care of it and what helps it to thrive, because we all want to thrive. All of us want to thrive.
Yeah.
And I do think it's important to pull in this aspect too of stress, because we live in a stressful world. And in our last session, we had a really good conversation too around the fact that women are doing the most. And in today's day and age, like, we can be the mother, we can be running a multi-million-dollar business, we can be everywhere at once, but we also end up putting ourselves in a lot of stress and not necessarily being able to maintain balance. And stress is bad for our hormones too, bad for our overall health. So can you just talk a little bit about stress and the impact on the body and why it's important to slow down? And yeah, just let's start there.
Yeah, stress can be and is one of the biggest causes of disease and imbalance within the body. And it's important to look at stress from a little bit of a more multidimensional perspective, right? We can be stressed, yet still have all of our basic needs met. We can have all of the money in the world. We can have all of the food in the fridge, and we can still feel a lot of stress. And I think that that's actually more of a common picture that I see in the women that I work with, is for the most part, basic needs like survival needs are being met, but stress is coming from work, family, kids, whatever it may be. And so, yeah, stress is inflammatory, right? It's very inflammatory to our system. And again, thinking about our hormonal composition, we can't be in prioritization of sex hormones, our estrogen and our progesterone, and also be in prioritization of our stress hormones, specifically cortisol, adrenaline, right? Our body is either in like reproduction mode, where it's prioritizing healthy hormone production, or it's in stress mode, where it's pumping out those more negative stress hormones. So we have to think of it as kind of like as like
A seesaw.
A seesaw. That's what I was thinking of. I was like, what is it called? So yeah, we need to think of it kind of like a seesaw. When our stress hormones are getting more of the prioritization, then our sex hormones are going to dip, and vice versa. So keeping stress low as best as we can is important. And even beyond that, it's being able to rebound and become resilient to stress. So there are inevitably going to be stressors within our life. It's more about how are we dealing with those stressors? How are we metabolizing them? If we are just stressed all day long and then not doing anything about it, and then the next day is stress all day long and we're not doing anything about it, that's going to compound within our system. Whereas if we experience stress, but then we take a few moments to re-regulate our nervous system. We go outside, we put our feet in the grass, we get some sunshine, we eat a nourishing meal, maybe we take a warm shower, like whatever it may be that reduces your stress. That's what we need to be in relationship with, is kind of this like, okay, stressful moment, okay, regulation. And for me, I find that people, women especially, that feels more doable than just don't stress. No stress, right? Because stress is a part of life. Like but it's inevitable. We're going to feel stress, but it's how we handle that stress. And yeah, our female physiology is sensitive, and it is designed for a slower, more grounded pace of life, right? It wants to be nurtured. It wants the sunshine in the morning, the breakfast, the slow days, like not rushing around all the time. Again, that's our physiology. That might not be our personality or our mindset or whatever it may be. And to your point, nowadays in this day of age, which is wonderful in a lot of ways, detrimental in a lot of other ways, women are everything. We're mothers, we're business owners, we're wives, we are best friends. Like we are holding a lot of hats. And so a lot of times all of these roles and responsibilities can have this negative influence on our physiology if we're not mindful of it. It's not to say we need to go back to the ancestral days where we just pottered around all day and played out in the garden. Like that sounds great for a lot of people. And I think that in my later years, that will probably be hopefully what I'm doing. But in this season of my life, like I want to be externally focused. I want to be building a business. I want to be having influence and helping people. And a lot of women agree with that. That's where they want to be as well. So I think that what that requires is just the knowledge, the education, the awareness around the need to slow down, the need to take it easy. I mean, my weeks are pretty full, but I'm not stacking thing after thing on my week during my weekends. Like my weekends are the main priority of my weekends is to rest. Yes, I'll have social things here and there. I'm not just living in my house doing nothing, but I think with that intention of rest comes prioritization of like what is going to give me energy versus take energy. And so I think that we need to have a little bit of a better orientation around that.
Yeah. And I really want to stress, like, I've been thinking about these things a lot too, and how much is just things we've learned or the way society is and how we feel we need to play into it versus what really serves us best. And with the work I do, which is so much creating the life you want, I've really had to sit with it and be like, well, what do I want? What does feel the best? And really looking at it and questioning, like, is this just what I think I should do and what I've been told to do versus what I want to do and what feels the best for me and ultimately leads to the best outcome. Yeah. So I think it's just important to know this, to not feel bad about it, to not feel guilty or feel shame or any of those things, because we're all learning. And it is it feels like a rebellious act sometimes to be like, I'm opting out of doing things that way, or I'm opting to put myself first. I'm opting to slow down. I'm opting to only, like today, I just had a workshop in this podcast. That's a huge amount of output, but I don't need to necessarily do more than that. Like I don't need to stack more on it and have every minute of every second filled to know that I actually had a huge impact and I produced a lot and I did a lot and it's going to create a lot of value. So it's also how we think about it and all this stuff that's then related to how we actually take care of ourselves and if we prioritize it.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I even myself knowing all that I know and sharing all of this with women, still find myself waking up in the morning, writing my to-do list. And then by the end of the day, it's like, why did I think I could do all of this? Why? Who
That's so true.
was I when I wrote this to-do list in the morning? And so a good practice for myself is, let me actually like just prioritize the most important things. The most important things that I really want to get done today. If I have an excess of energy afterwards, great. I know that there's other things that I might want to do or will have time and energy to do, but what's really in front of me and present today. And that has been that's been really soothing to my system, instead of being like, okay, I need to plow through my to-do list. It's like, okay, once I get through these things, let's see how I feel. Where's my energy at? What do I want to focus on for the rest of the day? So,
and that being okay and being good enough. Cause I think it's also sitting with that and having it be like, all right, I'm good with this.
Yeah.
So we have covered so much. I'm going to ask you the last 4 questions I ask everyone now, but I just want a little bit bottom line and summarize that why I felt this was so important to talk about is, one, to just raise more awareness around hormones, around fertility, both for men and women, and that it takes 2 to tango, and that our health is so important for so many things in terms of showing up as our best selves. And, you know, my decision to get off birth control, it was really not because I wanted to get pregnant, as we talked about, but because I wanted to put myself first and know my body. And in doing that, it has unlocked so much in terms of how I can actually, I'm going to use the phrase, live my best life, but literally live my best life by taking care of myself. And it is such a beautiful thing. I also know, and you touched upon this briefly, but if you are wanting to conceive, you really need to start that work 6 months in advance to when it actually happens and start thinking about that. But even then, taking a step even further back and realizing I don't have to be my healthiest self only when I want to get pregnant, because now I'm going to produce something else, produce a baby, but also because I want to maximize for my health and my well-being and my longevity and all these other things. So really viewing it from that angle has been so helpful for me to be like, this is key. This is important. This is something that really matters. And it's something that also has a huge impact on our food system when we do really think about what's best for our bodies, because we start making decisions from a different place.
Yes. Thank you for that summary. I feel like that really wraps up our conversation perfectly.
Yeah. So now I just want to ask you about our food system as a whole. The first question I ask everyone is, what is your vision for the future of food? So in 10 to 15 years, what would you like the future of food to look like?
The first thing that comes to my mind is for there to be more small family-oriented farms, and for people to have a deeper desire to produce food in their own way for themselves, their families, and their communities. So personally here, I live on 10 acres, and my husband and I have about 30 sheep. We have pigs now, we have chickens. And my goal for like ourselves and our immediate family, and hopefully the community soon, is that we can essentially, provide high quality animal protein for ourselves and for those in our communities. And I think that that could be, if we were to multiply that across the nation, across the world, that would be a really beautiful way to still contribute to our own inner vitality and also have a less dependent relationship on factory farming.
Definitely. What do you think we're missing to get there, to make that vision a reality?
That's a good question. I think legislation is a big piece. I'm not like an expert in that means, but I think that there needs to be better legislation around just animal practices. But in terms of my vision specifically, I think awareness is a huge piece that's missing. I don't think that most people have the awareness of even maybe having the desire to go to a family farm or to make that a part of their lifestyle, of the way that they orient to their food. So I think if there's a deeper awareness on a global scale around food, that could lead to more inspiration and desire for that to happen.
And when it comes to the work that you do, what help, what collaborations are you looking for? Would definitely want to name how people can work with you and a little bit more info on that. But is there anything that you need help on? We have people listening from all over the world. So I always like to offer the stage to be like, what can they do?
Wow. That's a really good question. Yeah, I'm a one woman show and I have been for a while, and have a lot I have a lot to say. I have a lot of I have a lot of wisdom to share, a lot of knowledge for people to hear and to receive. I think that something that would be really beneficial for Root and Womb and my brand is to have a little bit more strategic of a marketing strategy. And that's been an area within my business that I know could be better. So yeah, if anyone's hearing this and wants to collaborate in that sense, that would be lovely.
And I will sharpen that because you certainly do you do a lot. You post very frequently on Instagram. I'll leave the handle of yours in the show notes so people can follow you. But you also have a podcast. So I think we need to track someone to you that is able to tie it all up and share it even further than what you're doing, because it's a lot to be the speaker and then also the producer and the editor and the marketer and the distributor and Yeah, I've done the same job. So you need to be the mouthpiece. I'm adding this in what I think.
Thank you. Yeah, it's
we need someone who can help to produce it.
Yeah, the podcast is like where I know that voice and that message will be expressed more clearly and frequently. So yeah, I don't really have a huge problem with the Instagram piece. But the podcast I know could receive a little bit of a boost.
More love. All right. Yeah. We're attracting that to you. And then what's the best way for someone to get in touch with you?
Yeah. So my website is a really good place to learn more about just me, my education, ways to work with me. So that's www.rootandwombcollective.com. And then as you shared, I'm definitely on Instagram. That's my primary social media platform. So feel free to direct message me there. But yeah, I share a lot of content there on just female health, fertility, menstrual well-being, all of the things. I share just a lot about like my overall life, like our farm, what I'm doing, just kind of things along those lines too. And yeah, those are probably the best places. And then my email is rootandwombcollective@gmail.com. So those are kind of the primary spaces.
And maybe the last thing to clarify related to it is, if somebody wants to work with you, who is your ideal client? Do you work with any woman at any stage of them wanting to look at their hormonal health, just transition off birth control? Can you just speak a little bit more about who you like to serve, and so we can find those right people to work with you?
Yeah. So I primarily work with reproductive age women. So that's women anywhere from the age of typically like 16 to about 45. And primarily I work with women who, as I've shared, are experiencing menstrual health challenges, but that also might just want to learn more, to explore this realm more. I mean, like you, Analisa, you weren't necessarily experiencing any roaring symptoms, but you wanted a really intentional space where you could reconnect to your body, learn about how to treat your hormones and prepare for pregnancy down the road. So I work with people who just also have that desire as well. But a huge focus of my work right now too, in addition to the transitioning off birth control piece, is preconception. So helping women really prepare for pregnancy, typically anywhere from 6 months to 2 years before they want to get pregnant, so that when conception time arrives, it's met with excitement and it's met with joy, not like fear of the unknown or what's going to happen, because you've put in that work and that time. So
totally.
I typically don't really work with like perimenopausal or menopausal women.
And I just want to add that I knew I needed a coach because I knew I would not do this work unless I had help. And I think that's always a great place to start looking for someone to work with. I was extremely overwhelmed by the amount of information out there. I just wanted to tell someone to kind of like cut the crap for me and tell me like, here's what you need to know for your case, your situation. Yeah. So if that resonates with anyone listening, I highly recommend for you to just look at your current situation, work with someone, the first package to work with you is 6 sessions, right? So that's a good commitment, but not too crazy of a commitment to get going and really think of yourself first.
Yes.
Thank you for coming on. Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate that you've taken the time to share your wisdom and talk about all these things. We'll link to everything that we mentioned, and I just so appreciate you taking the time to talk about this because I've become so passionate about it, surprisingly.
Yeah. I'm glad we can share our passions together because there's a lot of this that, gets to be a deeper part of just awareness within women's minds and hearts. So thank you for having me. And I hope that this conversation was really enriching for those who have been listening.
Yeah, thank you. All right, that's all for today. What'd you think? If you enjoyed this episode, leave a 5-star review or a comment with your thoughts. You can also send me a message directly on LinkedIn or Instagram. I'm Analisa Winther on both platforms. I also love hearing about your wins and what inspired you about this episode, so please share that with me as well. If you really liked it, consider becoming a subscriber of the show. Doing so gives thanks to me and also supports the creation of more awesome content like this. You can sign up to become a subscriber using the link down here in the show notes. And if you'd like to learn more about working with me, you can read about my coaching programs and investor services on my website, www.analisawinther.com. Thanks again for listening, and a reminder to hit that subscribe button to be updated about new episodes. I'll see you next time.